We're now in server 03 and basically the same as before, but what we're doing is we're adding in a project type. So when we resolve the student project, it can know what type this is. It has an ID and we're not specifying any requirements for demo purposes. So when we come down into our resolvers, when we get to students and projects, because it's a graph nature, everything is linked. GraphQL knows all of these interrelationships. When it comes to students and sees a project, whereas before there was nothing to define it, it can now come to a top level and see project that has the 3 fields that get resolved. And for the moment, we're just hard coding in standard sort of values. What we can do here, test project, it returns an ID. We've said it must be of type ID. The name is a string completed Boolean. There we're setting it here. So we have project.id, project.name, project.completed. So if we go into the playground and bring that across, let's refresh, and now if we come into down here, we can see we have a query, for example, here that we can copy and paste. We'll see, bring it in and place it in here. So what we do is when we click on this now, not only do we get each of the IDs, but we get a resolution of what the projects are. And of course the ID is the same for all of them because we've not filtered through yet, but we can see we get back the ID, the name and the completed as per our resolution. And we can sort of see when we look up in here, we can see that when we get that, whenever there is a project in the student projects, it returns a list of projects. It must have an ID, name and completed. So long as we return back in this resolution field here, we can do it. And if, for example, we comment out that there, come back in here, and if we click here into there and refresh, because we've not said things have to exist, they're not required, it can come back with null. But if we come back into here and say we must know whether it's completed or not, everything's fine in terms of schema and project, but because we're not returning something back here, when we come in here and refresh, because we've got a new query, when we do this, we can say cannot return for non-nullable field. So if we took completed out and did this, that's fine, we're not asking for it. But once we ask for it, we can't return null unless we specified in our schema that it could be null. So if we come back here and turn this off, save it, go back in, refresh the page, that's fine, the query resolves okay. The schema, we can send this query through. And there we go. So when we send that query through, it comes back okay. We can see an output here that we're displaying some project names. That's because in our query here, we're actually doing a console log of what we're sending back. But that is the return string for the name. And now let's comment this pick out, send that back. And when we come back here and refresh that, now if we refresh the schema and send that back, returning back null. What's going on here? Let's control save, returns back true, comes in here, refresh, there we go, refreshed it through, the right query's gone through, and we can see we're getting that data back. So what we want to do is move on to a situation where we actually resolve correctly what the project ID details are based on the ID sent, and we'll be able to see that because we know straight away that we're getting the args. So when we come back in here, we do know that we're getting parent, comma args. We don't need to specify the others. And what we could do is then basically spend out console log args. Let's see what that does. So we come in here, go back in here, refresh, send that through. Let's have a look in the console. Actually, it's an empty object because we're not actually sending any arguments through just yet. Refresh. And we'll see that as we move through into the next lessons, how we'll be able to resolve all of these things to actually get the details. So ID args1, send that back, refresh the page, send that query through, And what are we getting in the console logs? That's empty there. So we'll move on to the next lesson, where what we'll be doing in Server 04 is actually getting the project by ID and actually finding project details. So we'll move into that in the next lesson.